You know exactly what you should do. You've known for a while, actually. You should wake up earlier. You should eat better. You should have that conversation you've been avoiding for weeks. You should stop scrolling at midnight and start working on the thing that actually matters to you. You know all of this. You've read the articles, maybe even a few books. You've made the lists. You've set the reminders. And yet, here you are, still hitting snooze, still ordering the same takeout. Still putting off the conversation, still on your phone at midnight. This isn't laziness, it isn't weakness, and it definitely isn't a lack of information. Something deeper is going on, something that has nothing to do with knowing what's right, and everything to do with why knowing is almost never enough. That gap, the space between what you know and what you actually do, is exactly what one book set out to explain. And once you understand what's really happening inside your own mind, you'll never look at self-discipline, habits, or personal change the same way again. The book is The Happiness Hypothesis, written by Jonathan Haidt, a social psychologist who spent years at the University of Virginia and later at NYU's Stern School of Business studying morality, emotion, and what actually makes human beings feel like their lives are going well. This isn't a self-help book in the traditional sense. It's something richer than that. Haidt went back through ancient wisdom, from Stoic philosophy to Buddhist teachings to the writings of Marcus Aurelius, and then held each idea up against modern psychology to see what actually holds up. What he found was surprising, and in some cases, completely counterintuitive. The central idea of the book can be summed up in one image that Haidt borrows and refines. Your mind is a rider sitting on top of an elephant. The rider is your conscious, rational self, the part of you that makes plans, sets goals, and knows exactly what you should do. The elephant is everything else, your emotions, your instincts, your deeply ingrained habits, your need for comfort, your fear of change. And the problem, the real problem, is that the rider thinks he's in control. He isn't. And there's one idea near the end of this book that reframes everything. An idea about why fighting yourself is not just exhausting, it's the wrong strategy entirely. We'll get there. But first, you need to understand what you're actually dealing with. If ideas like these make you think differently about your own life, subscribe. This is exactly what we explore here every single week. So let's start with the elephant. Most of us walk through life assuming that our rational mind is running the show. We think, we decide, we act. That's how it feels from the inside. But Haidt points to decades of research in neuroscience and psychology that tell a very different story. The emotional, instinctive part of your brain is older, faster, and far more powerful than the reasoning part. It was shaped by millions of years of evolution to keep you alive, to seek pleasure, avoid pain, protect your status, and stay connected to the people around you. Your rational mind, the rider, came along much later, and while it's genuinely brilliant at planning and language and abstract thinking, it has far less control over your actual behavior than you'd like to believe. Here's how you can feel this in your own life. Think about the last time you made a firm decision the night before, something clear and reasonable, and then woke up the next morning and felt absolutely no motivation to follow through. The rider made the plan. The elephant didn't get the memo. And when those two are out of sync, the elephant wins almost every time, not because you're broken, but because that's simply how the mind works. Haidt describes this as one of the most important things you can know about yourself. You are not one unified self with a single will. You are, in a very real sense, two systems sharing one body, and they don't always want the same things. The rider can argue, persuade, and override the elephant in the short term, but sustained change, the kind that actually sticks, requires something different entirely. It requires working with the elephant, not a... This single insight already explains so much. It explains why motivation comes and goes without warning. Why you can be completely convinced of something intellectually and still not feel it emotionally. Why willpower runs out. why people who seem disciplined from the outside aren't necessarily fighting harder than you. They've just built their lives in a way that the elephant is comfortable moving in the right direction. And this is where the book gets genuinely interesting, because Haidt isn't just describing the problem. He's pointing toward a path through it. Now, one of the most quietly radical ideas in the entire book is this: happiness is not something that lives inside you, waiting to be unlocked. It's also not something that comes from the outside, from the right job, the right relationship, the right amount of money in your account. Haidt argues, carefully and with real evidence behind him, that happiness emerges from the connection between the two. It lives in the space between your inner world and your outer circumstances. And that distinction matters more than it might sound. Think about the last time you achieved something you'd been working toward for a while. Maybe a promotion, maybe finishing a degree, maybe finally moving into a place of your own. There was a moment of real satisfaction, maybe even joy. But how long did it last? People, not nearly as long as they expect. The psychologists call this hedonic adaptation, which is just a technical way of saying that humans get used to things fast. The new becomes normal. The exciting becomes routine. The thing you wanted so badly becomes the background noise of your life within weeks or months. Your emotional baseline resets, and you're back where you started looking for the next thing. But here's what Haidt found when he looked closer. People who seem genuinely satisfied with their lives aren't people who achieved more. They're people who built strong connections, who found meaning in what they do, who have relationships where they feel seen and valued. The happiness they experience isn't a peak they reached. It's more like a temperature they maintain, because they've arranged their inner life and their outer circumstances in a way that actually fits together. That's the insight. Not that external things don't matter, they do, but that they only matter when they're connected to something real on the inside. You can feel the truth of this if you think about a time when you accomplished something impressive, but felt strangely empty afterward, or a time when something small, a conversation, a meal, a moment of quiet, felt unexpectedly meaningful. The elephant knows the difference even when the writer can't quite explain it. And this leads directly into one of the most surprising and honestly uncomfortable ideas in the book. Haidt calls it the adversity paradox, and it goes something like this. Some of the most important growth you will ever experience in your life will come directly from difficult, painful, unwanted experiences. Not in spite of the difficulty, because of it. Now, this is not the kind of hollow encouragement you've heard before. The everything happens for a reason version of comfort that people offer when they don't know what else to say. Haidt is making a much more precise and evidence-based claim. He's drawing on research into what's sometimes called post-traumatic growth, the documented phenomenon where people who go through serious hardship, illness, loss, failure, betrayal, often come out the other side with a clearer sense of what matters, stronger relationships, and a deeper capacity for empathy and resilience. Not all of them, not automatically, but enough that the pattern is real and worth taking seriously. The key, as Haidt explains it, is the processing. The adversity itself doesn't produce growth. What produces growth is the meaning you build around the experience, the story you tell about what happened and what it showed you about yourself and the world. Two people can go through the same painful event and come out completely different on the other side. One bitter and closed, the other wiser and more alive. And the difference almost always comes down to whether they were able to find or construct some kind of meaning from what they went through. The writer does that work, but the elephant has to be willing to move forward. This is one of the questions real readers debate most when they talk about this book. Does Haidt mean we need to suffer to grow? And the answer, when you read carefully, is no. He's not romanticizing pain or suggesting you should seek it out. He's saying something more honest than that. He's saying that if you've already been through something hard, the worst thing you can do is treat it as purely meaningless. Because meaning, even constructed meaning, is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. It's what allows the elephant to take a step forward when everything in it wants to stay still. Here's where the book shifts into territory that most people don't expect, and it's the part that tends to stay with readers the longest. One of the most persistent myths about personal change is that your personality, your emotional patterns, your default reactions are essentially fixed. That the elephant is just who you are. That some people are naturally anxious or naturally unmotivated or naturally prone to anger or sadness, and the best you can do is manage it. Haidt pushes back on this directly, and the science he cites is worth paying attention to. The elephant can change. Not quickly, not through sheer intention, but through sustained practice and the right conditions. The emotional, instinctive parts of your mind are genuinely malleable. Cognitive behavioral therapy works because it rewires the automatic thoughts that feed the elephant's reactions. Meditation, practiced consistently over months, has been shown to literally change the structure of the brain in regions associated with emotional regulation and attention. Even certain medications, when appropriate, don't just mask symptoms, but create a window of stability in which real change becomes possible. Haidt isn't prescribing any of these things. He's making a larger point. You're not stuck. The version of you that keeps sabotaging the writer's best plans is not a permanent fixture. It's a pattern, and patterns can be reshaped. This matters deeply in a culture that swings between two extremes. On one side, there's the toxic positivity that says you can change anything through motivation and mindset. On the other, there's a kind of fatalism that says you are your brain chemistry, your trauma, your upbringing, and there's not much you can do about it. Haidt lands somewhere more nuanced and more useful than either of those positions. Yes, change is possible. No, it won't happen through willpower alone. The writer can point the direction, but the elephant needs the right environment, the right relationships, the right daily conditions to actually move. Think about what this means practically. If you've been trying to build a new habit and failing, the question isn't, what's wrong with me? The question is, what does the elephant need that it isn't getting? Maybe it needs the friction removed. Maybe it needs a clear reward. It can feel immediately, not just a distant benefit the writer finds logical. Maybe it needs to feel safe before it can move forward. Understanding this doesn't give you an excuse to avoid change. It gives you a smarter way to pursue it. And then Haidt lands on something that the psychology of happiness has been quietly pointing toward for decades, something that cuts directly against how a lot of Americans are taught to think about success and purpose. He calls it the two pillars, and he frames it simply. The two things that matter most to human flourishing are love and work. Not wealth, not status, not achievement measured in titles or followers or square footage. Love meaning the quality of your close relationships, your sense of belonging, your ability to give and receive care. And work meaning not just a job, but engagement in something that uses your abilities and connects you to something larger than yourself. When both are present, people tend to feel that their lives are going well, even when circumstances are objectively difficult. When one or both are missing, even people with every external advantage tend to feel that something essential is absent. In 2026, this idea hits differently than it did when the book was first published. We are living through a strange epidemic of disconnection. Remote work has given many people flexibility, but stripped away the casual human contact that used to happen naturally. Social media has made it easier than ever to perform a social life while actually experiencing profound isolation. And the cultural pressure to optimize everything, your career, your body, your side hustle, your morning routine, has quietly crowded out the slower, less measurable things that actually sustain a human being. The Sunday dread that so many people feel, that low-grade anxiety that settles in on Sunday afternoons before the week begins, is not just about workload. It's the elephant signaling that something about the life it's carrying doesn't feel right. Not wrong enough to make a dramatic change, but not right enough to feel at peace. Haidt's answer to that feeling isn't a productivity hack. It's a reorientation toward the people in your life, toward work that actually means something to you, toward a daily existence that the elephant can live in without constant resistance. And now we've arrived at the idea that the whole book has been building toward, the one that pays off everything we've talked about so far, the one that, once you really hear it, changes the question you ask yourself when you're feeling stuck. Most of us, at some point in our lives, have made happiness the goal, not in a conscious, explicit way, but in the background of our decisions. We choose the safer job because we think it will feel better. We avoid the hard conversation because we think the discomfort isn't worth it. We chase the promotion, the vacation, the relationship, the number on the scale, because somewhere underneath all of it, we believe that getting there will finally produce the feeling we're looking for. And the cruel irony that Haidt documents with real care and real research is this: the direct pursuit of happiness is one of the surest ways to miss it entirely. This isn't a philosophical riddle. It's a psychological mechanism. When you make happiness the target, you spend your mental energy monitoring whether you feel happy enough, which pulls you out of the very experiences that would have made you feel good if you'd stayed present in them. The writer keeps checking the instrument panel instead of watching the road, and the elephant, who lives entirely in the present moment, gets confused and restless because it can sense that something about the whole effort feels hollow. What Haidt found across ancient wisdom traditions and modern research alike is that the people who report the deepest, most durable sense that their lives are going well are almost never the ones who are chasing happiness directly. They're the people who were absorbed in something meaningful, connected to people they genuinely cared about, engaged in work that challenged them in the right ways, living according to values that felt true to who they actually were. Happiness, in other words, is a byproduct. It shows up when you stop hunting it and start building a life that the elephant can move through with some degree of ease and purpose. This is the idea that early readers of this book consistently say changed something for them. Not because it's comforting, it's actually a little unsettling at first, but because it reframes the entire project of being a person. You're not trying to feel better, you're trying to live better. And those two things, while related, are not the same. Feeling better is something the writer tries to engineer. Living better is something that happens when the writer and the elephant finally stop fighting and start moving in the same direction. Think about the moments in your own life when you felt. Most of them, if you look closely, weren't moments when you were trying to be. They were moments when you were fully engaged, fully present, fully in something, a challenge, a connection, a creative effort, a conversation that mattered. The happiness was there, but it came as a surprise, almost as a side effect. That's not an accident. That's the mechanism Haidt is describing. And once you see it, you start to understand that the gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it isn't really a gap in information. It's a gap in meaning. The elephant doesn't move toward things that feel empty, no matter how logical they sound. It moves toward things that feel real, connected, and alive. So here's where that leaves you. Before this book, you might have believed that the problem was discipline, that if you could just force yourself harder, want it more, build stronger willpower, you'd finally close that gap between who you are and who you know you could be. And that belief, as reasonable as it sounds, is exactly what keeps so many people stuck, because it puts all the weight on the writer, and the writer alone cannot move the elephant. Not sustainably, not in a way that lasts. What Haidt offers instead is something more honest and, ultimately, more hopeful. The path forward isn't about overpowering the resistant parts of yourself. It's about understanding them well enough to work with them. It's about building the conditions, the relationships, the environment, the daily practices that allow the elephant to feel safe enough to move. It's about finding work that carries meaning, not just income. Choosing connections that feel real, not just convenient. And letting go of happiness as a destination you're trying to reach, and treating it instead as something that emerges naturally when your life is pointed in a direction that actually matters to you. That shift is harder than it sounds, and easier than the alternative. And the full book, with all its stories, its research, its philosophical depth, gives you a much richer map for making it than any summary ever could. If this conversation opened something up for you, the link to get your own copy is in the comments below. Some books deserve to be read slowly, underlined, returned to. This is one of them. Here is the thought to carry with you. The rider and the elephant are not enemies. They're partners who haven't learned to trust each other yet. Your job isn't to win that fight. Your job is to end it.